So today I would like to show you a selection of modules that can enhance your experience when using polyphony in VC VRack. These are various tools that can help you have more control when using polyphony. Of course, feel free also to share your favorite polyphonic tools with us so we can all experiment with different ways of doing things. Now, the first couple of modules will allow you to spread your polyphonic voices in the stereo field, creating wider sounds. So, for example, we have the Bass Master Junior from MindMeld, which I use a lot for this. So I have here 4-note chords. Right, I have a Harmony 2 from Squinktronics generating the chord, and the voice itself is the VCO going through the VCF. Right, and for now, especially if you are with headphones, you can clearly hear that all 4 voices are in the center. There's no stereo spread whatsoever. Right, but if I send this first through Bassmaster Junior, right, left and right, for now we get the voices or this chord just on the left channel. But in the right-click menu, we can choose under poly input behavior to sum to stereo. Right, and now it will sum the polyphonic voice, the chord, into stereo, and we can control the width. Right, so very spread or just slightly spread. Right, and actually with this module we have even control over 2 frequency bands. So in this case it's split at 120 Hz. You can change this, of course. Right, let's take it a bit higher, and then I can solo just the highs or just the lows, change the width of the lows separately, for example, make the lows mono. Right, change the gain if it's too loud, if it's too low. Right, you have lots of control with this module. And now the voices, the 4 voices are spread left and right in the stereo field. By the way, I'm using here walk to modulate the filter, right, to modulate the cutoff point of the filter. And in this case, for now, it's monophonic. So one walk will control the filter of all 4 voices together, but we can also turn it into a polyphonic modulation source just by connecting the pitch to the rate input, right? The pitch in this case is polyphonic, right? So now I have it going to the rate input of walk, and now we have 4 different modulation sources, 1 for each note, for each channel. Right, so we have now also polyphonic modulation, and there is also the bigger version of Bassmaster. This is just Bassmaster, not Bassmaster Junior. In this case, we have global gain control, we have a mix control, and we have even CV inputs for the width, right? So you can add also movement here with CV control. And another thing, if you're using the MindMeld mixer, the Mix Master, it has this spread functionality built in. So here I have another layer with the VCO unit. It's playing the same chords. I have here again polyphonic modulation, in this case with the mod 7. In the right click menu you can choose how many channels of polyphony you want. Again, in this case I have 4 notes, 4 voices. So I have 4 channels of polyphony here. Right, and this is going to its own channel here on the mixer. In the right click menu, if I right click this specific channel, we have here the same polyphonic behavior. Also this, I can directly from the mixer sum this to stereo. And then if I right click it again, we have also stereo width. Right, so we can make this more or less spread in the stereo field. Another module that can spread your voices is Orbit from Strereo. This module here, in this case I have, let me solo this, I have slips, sequencing the FM operator polyphonically. In the right click menu you can change how many channels of polyphony you want. In this case I have 7. Right, so we have again a polyphonic voice. Also here I'm using walk, and again I'm sending the pitch to the rate input, so we also walk now is polyphonic. Right, it's already going through orbit. Right, and orbit will randomize the position of each voice with each incoming trigger. So we can set the spread amount. I will go all the way up. We can also add drift, so things will have more movement. And now we need gates to trigger orbit. I'm going to use the same polyphonic gates. And again, if you are with headphones, you can hear this quite clearly how the voices are panned left and right. There are also different distribution options. Right, we even have external, so we can use external polyphonic signals for this. Again, I have here the mode 7 set to 7 channels of polyphony, just like slips. And then I can use this as my source. I will add some delay to this. And I also have here a bass with another interesting module that can help you with polyphony. This is the bass module by Sively, this one here. This will accept polyphonic pitch, like from a chord, and it will extract the bass note from this chord according to different modes that you can select here. So here I have the bass note going, sequencing the classic VCO, going through a filter, some delay. There is also a sub oscillator here with a sine wave. Let's take a look at a few tools that can help us adjust things per voice in a polyphonic signal. So here, for example, I have chords with the note sec 16 from JW. In the right-click menu, I have it set to 4 channels of polyphony. This is sequencing the VCO unit. Right, you can see that also here I'm using Bassmaster Junior to spread the voices. It's going also through some delay. And I have the notes or the pitch information going through oct from VCV, right? So I can transpose things by octave, and in this case it will transpose everything, all the notes together. Right, so the whole chord. But I can also set each voice individually with something like the Polycon 8 from Bog Audio. There is also a 16-channel version. But again, in this case, we have polyphony of 4. So to set the polyphony, in this case, in the right-click menu, we can choose polyphony of 4 channels. You can see now we have 4 channels active. Right, and this I can send to the CV input of oct, and now I can control the octave of each voice individually. So for example, I can take the second voice up, the third even higher, the fourth down in octave, right? So this is per voice. I also have here polyphonic modulation, again coming from the mode 7. Right, again, the right-click menu, I have it set to polyphony of 4. So we have 4 different LFOs. And now with the polyscale from Venom, I can scale or I can attenuate each LFO, modulation channel individually, right? As soon as I connect the LFOs to the polyscale, you can see we have polyphony of 4. This will go back to the destination, and now I can attenuate the LFOs individually per channel. We can also scale and offset per channel, right? So here I have 8 channels of polyphony, again with slips, right? Also here in the right-click menu, it's set to 8 channels. So let me just solo this for a second. This is the FM2 VCO. Right, so again, we have polyphony of 8, and already, first of all, I'm using here the quad LFO from Surge XT, right? It's modulating 2 parameters here on the FM2 VCO, but also the quad LFO we can turn to be polyphonic. Again, in the right-click menu, we can change the number of channels of polyphony. In this case, again, we have 8. And now you can see we have 8 modulation sources from each output. Right, and now I can use the poly of 8 again from Boga Audio, and also here there's a 16 channel version if you need more than 8 channels, but I can use this to scale and offset each channel of modulation, right? So the modulation will go first through poly offset here, right? Both channels, you can see we have all 8 channels active, and now I can offset them, right, to have different positions and attenuate them. So for each channel, we have a different modulation amount, right, and each channel is slightly different. Now the poly offset modules have another function that we will look at later on, but we have also modules that can generate CV with different ratios between the channels. Right, so here again I'm using slips, in this case with 5 channels of polyphony. Right, again let me solo this for a second. This is sequencing 2 VCO units, and here I have this VCO modulating, or it will modulate the phase, right, so we have phase modulation also. Right, and here I have omega 3 from Bizet. I can set the number of channels also here to 5 because we have polyphony of 5 channels, and you can see it will generate 5 values at a certain ratio. Right, we can also change things like the shape or the curve. We can offset them up and down and scale the overall voltage here, and we can also change their phase, and it has even a CV input, so I can use polyphonic modulation to change the phase of the sources here and get more movement. We also have the Goli Penerator, the poly generator from Computer Scare. Right, also here we can generate offset with different shapes. Right, so I can use this, for example, to control the amount of phase modulation. Right, and again, I can change things, I can spread, change the center, again, offset, scale, and we have different modes. For example, we have linear, we have sigmoid, right, something like this. There is also sort of random. Right, so you can use this again just to offset things and add variation between the different polyphonic voices, so not all the voices are the same. Here I have a bass also, I have the trigger sequencer from Sequocell, sequencing kick all, some chorus, distortion, filtering, all the good stuff. The next set of tools I want to show you will let you combine signals into a polyphonic cable or split a polyphonic signal into multiple monophonic cables. So of course there's the VCV merge and VCV split, right? So I can merge up to 16 signals into a polyphonic cable here, right? In this case I have 3 LFOs, and if you have a polyphonic cable or signal you want to split, you can use the VCV split, right? So we get the 3 LFOs as individual cables, right? But of course, also here there are more modules with more functionality. For example, again, as I mentioned before, the poly offset from Boga Audio can also merge signals, right? Which is also quite useful. And there are even mixers that will allow you to split a polyphonic signal across their channels. Right, and have more control over things. So here, for example, what I'm doing, I'm using the Polycon 8, right? We looked at it before. It's set to 8 channels of polyphony. It's just outputting offset that I'm then quantizing into an 8-channel chord, right? I have 8 different notes here, and this is eventually creating a chord with the VCO unit. And now I can use the multi-split from Venom to split these 8 notes into multiple groups, right? So for example, I can set the first output to be the first 3 channels. I just right click the output and then we have channels. I can set it to 3, right? So again, we have all in all 8 channels, but now I have here from this output just the first 3 channels that I can then process, for example, through a flanger. And of course, also here I'm using Bassmaster Junior. Right, so again, we have all in all 8 voices, 8 different notes, but in this case, from the first output, I have it set just to the first 3 notes. So I have one group of 3 notes. I can have another group of, let's say, 4 notes, right, and then process this again differently. In this case, it will go to a VCA and a delay, right, and I will sequence it with a trigger sequencer here, right? So we have 3 channels, and now we have 4 more channels. And then we have another left, right, another channel left for a total of 8 channels. So this one will come from the third output here, and I will process it with Nimbus, which is a granulizer, a clouds clone. Right, so again, with a multi-split, we can split polyphonic signals with different combinations into different groups and process them individually. And again, we can also merge signals with the poly offset from Bog Audio. Right here again, I have a polyphonic sequence with slips, in this case with 8 channels of polyphony. Let me solo this for a second. This will sequence the VCO unit, going through a filter. Again, everything for now, the chain is polyphonic, also the filter is polyphonic. Right, and here I have Oct, right, from Strereo. It has 8 LFOs that I can merge into a polyphonic signal with the poly offset, and then I'm not only merging them, but I can also offset them and scale each channel individually. So again, we have 8 channels of polyphony. I will set the poly offset to 8. Also here again, there's a bigger version with 16 channels if you need it. Right, and then I will connect the 8 channels of Oct. Right, just like this. Right, and this I will use to control the filter again polyphonically. Right, with 8 channels, but now each channel, each LFO, I can also offset. Right, so they have also different ranges. I can offset them and scale them individually. Right, I can also use this to modulate the pulse width of the oscillator. I have here also some delay for this voice. Right, so again, we can merge signals and then also offset them and scale them. And again, there are also mixers that can give you control over each channel individually. Right, here I have the Polygene sequencer, which is a polyphonic Euclidean sequencer. Let me again solo this for a second just so we can concentrate on this sound. Right, it will eventually sequence polyphonic hi-hats. Right, I have here white noise going through a VCA and the bandpass filter. For now it's still monophonic. Right, and in order to set the number of polyphonic channels with the Polygene, we need to use a polyphonic clock. In this case I have a multiplied by 4 clock, but instead of merging this clock 4 times, because I want to have 4 channels of polyphony, I can just use something like the polyclone to clone this clock. Right, it will go first to the poly, clone, and then back to the sequencer, and then I can set it to be cloned or multed or duplicated 4 times. Right, so again, instead of just connecting this to a merge 4 cables, 4 of the same clocks, we can just use the polyclone for this. And now we have 4 different sequences, right, each with its own settings, 4 Euclidean sequences. And we have now polyphony, as you can see. Right, now the first thing we can do is, for example, use again the Polyphonic 8 to offset the bandpass filter, so each voice will have its own cutoff point. Right, so now we have 4 different hi-hats, and this is going to the mix 4 from Bogo Audio. Right, it's going to the first input here, and you can see just the first channel is active, but in the right-click menu, I can spread this input into channels 1 and 4, right, and now each channel will be in its own track, right. If I solo this for a second, for example, we have just this sound, right, or this one. Right, of course, we can pan things, we can change the levels individually, we can even modulate things. Right, so now we have 4 Euclidean sequencers with 4 hi-hats. Of course, there are other mixers. There is also the bigger version of the mixer from Bogo Audio with 8 channels, and Press DUC, both versions of Press DUC from CV Funk will do this by default. If you connect a polyphonic input to the polyphonic signal to the first input, it will spread it either through 8 channels or 16 channels. Right, so you can use also a mixer for this. In this case, I will just add a nice bass drone here with a classic VCO and a sub oscillator. The next set of modules will allow you to use polyphony to add more complexity to your sounds. Here, for example, I have the Unison module from Surge XT that I can use to fatten up a sound by creating multiple copies of it and then detuning the copies from one another. So the voice I have here is a drone with 2 VCO units. This will go to the VCO input, and then the pitch output will go to the oscillators, and you can hear already we get sound. Right, we have here also built-in filter that we can use. Right, and now we can choose how many voices we want to have, how many copies. So in this case, I will go with, let's say, 8. Right, so now we have polyphony of 8 channels. Right, and I can start detuning them from one another. Right, we can also add drift to add even more movement. Right, so now we have a much bigger sound. We created copies of this drone and detuned each copy separately. Here I have a trigger sequencer with a trig sequencer from Sequencel. It will trigger an envelope that I will use to then control the filter here. And I have it going also through a delay. We can also create a sustain effect with polyphony. So here I have the step sequencer also from Sequencel. It will sequence the FM2 VCO. Let me solo this for a second. Right, so we can concentrate on this. Right, you can hear that even though we have here a longer decay on the envelope, the notes will still cut off and will change with each change in note, right? They will not sustain, but we can create something like a sustain pedal on a piano, sustaining the notes with a sine from Bogo Audio. So the pitch will go first through a sine, and also the gates, right, the gate input to the gate output here. And now we can choose how many voices we would like to have, right? So in this case, I'm going to set this to 8. Right, and now you can hear the notes sustain and decay according to the envelope, because now we have polyphony of 8 channels. So each voice, each note gets its own channel. I have here also polyphonic modulation, again set to 8 channels of polyphony. We can also scan through polyphonic signals. In this case, I have a 6-note chord. Again, I'm going to solo this just so we can concentrate on this sound, right? You can hear we have a 6-note chord with harmony 2 and the VCO unit. But now I can use something like the polyfade from Venom to randomly scan through the notes of the chord. So the signal will go to polyfade and then back to the Bassmaster Junior that I have here. Right, I'm using here an external random signal to scan through the notes. So now we don't get a chord, but we scan through this polyphonic signal, through the polyphonic channels. The last set of modules I want to show you will help you see what's going on with your polyphonic signals. For example, you can use signals from CV Funk, which is a 6-channel scope, and it will automatically split polyphonic signals so you can see each channel and split the signal as well. Right here I have a 4-note chord, so if I send, for example, the triangle wave to the first input, you can see we have each channel individually on the scope. Right, so you can see like this what happens with polyphonic signals, and from the outputs here we get the individual channels, right? So if you want also to split this polyphonic signal, you can also do this. You can also visualize the notes of a chord with the visualizer module from Screentronics. Right here, for example, I have it with Harmony 2, which works perfectly with it. I have here volt per octave. This will go to the volt per octave. If you are using Harmony 2, for example, you have also the scales output, right, that you can use to transfer the chord, right? So now I cannot change the type of chord because it will get it from the Harmony 2, right? And then you can visualize the notes that you have here, right, and see exactly what notes are playing. The same here with 4View from Impromptu, right? We have up to 4 notes that we can see. You can either, if you're not using the chord key, for example, you can either just connect the polyphonic signal and it will show you the notes, right? Or you can connect the individual outputs, of course, right, if you want. But again, if you are using something like the chord key, this can work also as expander. You just place it next to the module and it will receive the notes from there. You can either see the notes or the type of chord, and you have here also outputs that you can use. Another useful module here that can help you is the PM16 Plus from Sequoia. In this case, we can mute and solo individual channels in a polyphonic signal, right? So here again, I have 4-note chords. I can mute the different channels individually, or if you right-click the buttons, you can also solo them, right? So this can also be quite helpful, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you again for watching. Cheers.